Welcome, everyone. I'm Angelo Robles to the Angelo Robles podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeart, and other platforms, and the founder and CEO of Family Office Association. To give you some context to our discussion today, it is late August of 2020. In today's times of COVID, unrest, and all the challenges that we're having, never before has it been so important because these podcasts and videos are often evergreen to give a little context to the time that we're in. I hope to be in position 10 years from now to go back and view them, and hopefully we'll be at a much, much better place than we are now from multiple different perspectives, not just COVID-19. We have a very pertinent and very interesting guest and very substantial from his global perspective. We're really excited. So today's session is called Dual Swiss and U.S. Citizen, Attorney and Investor, shares his geopolitical thoughts and ideas on dual citizenship and immigration. Now, our special guest is Reaz Jafri, founding partner of Withers Global Advisors and the founding partner of the Withers Worldwide Immigration Practice. We are going to cover, even more than just the title said, and don't assume that this is all people from the US potentially looking at optionality elsewhere. For sure, that's going to be a part of it, but we're going to cover the other way around as well, of the world looking to come here. So this should be, again, we're going to cross our fingers on my tornado here in Connecticut. This should be a very engaging dialogue. Before we say hello to Reaz, I do want to read a little bit more of a formal bio. Reaz Jafri has significant experience in American businesses, multinational companies, foreign investors, entrepreneurs, ultra high net worth individuals, and single family offices on all aspects of immigration law and nationality law. Reaz has developed a sterling reputation as a knowledgeable, creative, and solution-oriented attorney who fully understands the commercial benefit of predictable, efficient immigration counsel, as well as the personal and professional implications of immigration upon the lives of executives, investors, business owners, professionals, and their families. Reaz concentrates on business, investment, and employment cases and has successfully represented thousands of clients obtaining non-immigrant visas. On matters relating to immigrant visas, also known as green cards, he has extensive experience with all types of employment and investment-based cases, including extraordinary ability with multinational executive, national interest waiver, EB-5. In addition, Reaz represents individuals on family-based immigration matters. He's a trusted advisor to other law firms. So the experts around the world come to Reaz. We're very fortunate to have him. Reaz serves as immigration counsel to companies and law firms on M&A transactions, advises clients on intergovernmental matters, represents foreign companies and investors in establishing U.S. offices, and counsels U.S. companies in establishing foreign operations. Reaz, that was quite the bio. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Angelo. I'm not sure if I deserved such an extensive introduction, but I do appreciate it.
Well, to give the audience, why don't we start with a little bit of a lighthearted note? Talk a little bit about how many generations, in your case, this would be hundreds of years, that continually there's been at least one attorney in your family.
Yeah, so when I graduated from law school in 1991, my father told me that the first lawyer in our family was the Chief Justice of the High Court in India in 1720. So that immediately made me realize that since, and every generation since, someone in my family has been an attorney. So we've had this affliction for 300 years. As I was telling you earlier, I'm determined to have it stop, and I'm doing all I can to make sure that my sons and my siblings' children do not go to law school. Although we've not been successful, I have a niece my sister's daughter, who's already just graduated from law school. So looks like the curse is continuing.
Yes, at least for one more generation. This is an area that we're very interested in as we're getting more and more global and covering many things related to tax, asset protection, wealth preservation, optionality. And there's so much dynamics happening in the world now that Reaz and his background at an iconic firm and his founding of various practices that are pertinent to the issues we're talking about today, as noted, he's the person that often the quote unquote experts go to. So we're really excited to have you on. More than just your education, your background, and your experience now for going on near 30 years, you also have an interesting family story, not just a family that understands building successful businesses, but how that was, I don't know if I'd quite use, you could use the word, say, taken from you, and how your family a generation ago had to pick up and leave and come to the US effectively with nothing. So you understand what that's like. If you could tell that story, I'm sure our audience would enjoy it.
Sure. Well, my parents were born in what was then India. And after the partition of India into India and Pakistan, they fled India and moved to Pakistan. And at that point, a lot of our family wealth and other things, you can say, had to be left behind. I was born in East Pakistan, and the last time India and Pakistan went to war in 1971, again, we had a choice of either leaving or remaining and risking our lives. And unfortunately, some people in my family who couldn't make it out were killed. So we moved to America in 1972, again, leaving everything behind and starting over again. And, it's what makes America the greatest country in the world, in my opinion, is the fact that people like myself can't come here and within a generation achieve, a good level of success. So my family, we are attorneys and bankers. We own property. We've developed property. We have a bank that the family owns. My brother and I founded our own law firm initially, where I came over to Withers. So that's been our story. And when I talk to our, family office clients around the world who are thinking about whatever commercial, political, personal risk that they're trying to manage, I relate to them at many different levels. I relate to them as a family, having gone through it. I relate to them as a business owner, and also as someone who is multinational. And along the way, 15 years ago or so, I also picked up Swiss citizenship. So I am, a global citizen in the sense that I've got 3 different citizenships and passports, and I can navigate the world pretty freely, which seems to become more and more relevant these days.
Yes, it sure has. And really, I call that for someone living in the US or abroad, they may want to consider having optionality. It may not mean they're going to exercise the most ultimate of it and expatriate, although we'll talk about that, but having the opportunity for having a passport, dual citizenship, and some resources and have a level of diversity. We're not used to this in America, but where you come from and much of other parts of the world, if you go back far enough, and I don't mean 1,000 years, I mean often, decades or 100, 150 years, they know what it's like to have effectively governments take everything from them. And I know I sound like Mr. Libertarian whenever I talk about these issues, but that's not impossible to happen anywhere because they all thought that it was never going to happen where they are. And inevitably, unfortunately, it did. So you're correct. The situation that's going on now, globalization, COVID-19, unrest, all leading to deficits building up, which is going to be an additional burden, almost inevitable. Even I have to admit that probably there needs to be quote unquote, so-called, more taxes than we would like, although I would fight that tooth and nail from a variety of perspectives. But we're heading into, and I know, hey, we could go back every year and say this, we're heading into challenging times. We could also argue that maybe if we do certain things right, the future could look brighter than ever. We had Vivek Wadhwa on a couple of days ago and gave a little bit of, here's the greatness that could happen and we'll be hopeful, but here's the negative that could happen as well. with the advent of from weaponry to now viruses potentially being a weapon, arguably in the future, we're heading into very, very challenging times. So let's talk a little bit about the political picture, because I think this is going to play into it. And I know for some, this may be a bit of an uncomfortable subject, but it's important that we tackle things and not be wishy-washy about it. This is a very bifurcating time. I've never, in my well over 50 years, but don't want to admit that, never seen it so divided on the political aisle here in America with, quote unquote, the liberals and conservatives, or if you want to be a little more politically correct, Democrats and Republicans, and the bifurcation from a global perspective is as well. I'll put it this way. One of my multi-billion-dollar families, and I agree with them, said, you can never say never, but if I had to put the risk of chaos happening here, I'd put it at like whatever, 0.001%. But since COVID, since unrest, since everything that's happening, I'm going to move that up to 3 to 5%. Again, still, maybe you could argue not so bad, but that's scary enough, meaning everything could topple what's happening in Seattle and Portland, no matter who gets elected. You could see both sides bickering and causing, let's call it, a level of chaos. So these are very, very challenging times. At minimum, I'm assuming from families of great wealth here in the US, you're seeing an uptick in them, like I said, wanting to understand what their options may be. Am I making this up, or you are seeing that?
No, you're not making it up at all. And I can just share some stats with you and the audience. In the last 6 months, and maybe even going back a little bit more, I've been engaged by more American citizens of net worth of, let's say, between 100 million to 25 billion or more, who are looking at the data and processing it and feel that they have to have a second passport. They're viewing the things you mentioned, the political tribalism that we're living through, which is unprecedented and is very unsettling, regardless of, I think, which side of the aisle you're on. The social unrest that has perhaps always been simmering underneath the surface, but which seems to have really come into the fore right now. Plus the fallout from COVID-19. No one really knows what's going to happen. My clients in Silicon Valley who are very data oriented believe we're in a cycle where we're going to be in this place for 3 to 5 years, if not longer, where there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of shutdown, there's travel restrictions, and so forth. And for that reason, families are calling me, I want to say almost every day, because it seems like it's every day, and talking about, where can I get a second citizenship, which is a stable democracy where I can live, where I can also own property and I can have assets. And these are people that love the United States. They're not looking to, expatriate. They're just concerned about how to manage a risk. And by default, people end up settling in Europe for lots of reasons, primarily because a lot of the people in the States, my clients, have European ancestry, and that seems to be the natural place for them to go. But they're also looking at places like Singapore and Australia and New Zealand. So that's absolutely happening a lot. And risk, if I may, risk is very personal. It's what amazes me is I have clients who are, very spooked about the possibility of a Joe Biden victory and what that might bring as far as taxes and other aspects to our society. And then I have those people that are equally spooked about a President Trump re-election and what that may mean for our society. And one thing that I think as an advisor I do is I try not to be a psychiatrist and try to understand that's their risk assessment. And these are very smart people who are making very sound decisions as to why they see this as a risk. And my job is to kind of manage that for them and help them go from point A to point B.
For sure. No, that's very, very well stated. And like I said so many different times, these families at the levels we're talking about are incredibly wealthy. In theory, if they were to take their investments off the table, put it in cash, and I'm not saying that will happen or they should do that, but they have money to last for generation after generation, assuming they're not building $500 million yachts. So there's always going to be some exceptions to that. What really matters to them is going to be mitigating risk, especially significant ones like black swans. And that percentage that I gave earlier, yeah, it's a small percentage. Let's even say it's less than that. It's 1% or 2%. Okay, but what's the impact that will cause is horrific. It's the ultimate. And I've said this a lot, and I said this in my past podcasting, my masterclass. Inevitably, governments have the ultimate power. They confiscate your money all the time through taxation. And again, it likely is inevitable that's going to go up. Again, I don't want to scare people too much, but for someone that comes from where you came from and other people that are live on the call today that come from other countries, and the laws are on the books here in the US as well, civil forfeiture from federal and state. And there's been cases with the states, depending on what state, they don't even need to get a conviction. You then have to prove kind of your innocence to get your assets unfrozen. So if they really, really want to get you and say, you need to turn in your gold, you need to turn in your cryptocurrencies, we're going to come knock on your door and take your passport. I'm not saying those are going to happen. It's incredibly unlikely, but I'm not going to put those odds anymore at, 0.001. I've seen too much occur, and I've spoken to too many families around the world since COVID, and really since I've been building out my masterclass around mitigating and managing risk, really being the number one thing, especially for larger scale families. So what you just said, I've seen as well. It's not just people that are conservative Republicans that only care about taxes, and if the wrong person gets elected, they're out. That's not true. It's skewing a little bit towards concern about taxes for people looking for dual citizenship and some expatriating now. But I've seen some of my more liberal, incredibly wealthy families, like you said, look at Australia, New Zealand, and Sweden that are terrible for taxes, but they just like a level of stability, not putting the nose in the world's affairs. For whatever reason, it happens to both. It really doesn't matter from what political perspective that you're from. You've seen probably more so from families of wealth in other countries where the things that I just spoke about, which are horrific, government confiscation, forfeiture, you've been doing this for 30 years. You've seen this happen.
But, we're already there. A couple of years ago, our government passed a law that says that if a person owes the IRS more than $50,000, which is a very small amount of money to owe the IRS, they notified the State Department, which then cancels your American passport. So let's say a person is living abroad and they're not even aware of this happening. And this isn't fiction, this isn't fear. This happens, it's happening more and more now because the law really went into effect last year. You have no passport, so you cannot leave the United States until you settle that issue with the IRS. And I'm sure some of our audience members have dealt with this, maybe you have. Settling an affair with the IRS can take a long time. You can either pay them in full and then litigate, or you can fight with them, which can take a long time. Just recently I had a client in our Singapore office, a woman who's a US citizen living in Singapore. She went to the American embassy there to get a document notarized because that's one of the functions that the embassies provide. When she got there, she gave the person the passport because you have to. And he came back to her and said, I cannot give you your passport back because the IRS has a hold on it. So now she's stuck in Singapore. She's an American citizen stuck in Singapore. The only way for her to get her passport back is to pay whatever the IRS is saying that she owes them. And this was about $1.5 million they were saying. So she contacted her, family office folks. They paid the $1.5 million. She went back to the embassy and said, look, I've paid my $1.5 million, can I have my passport back? And the person said, no, we cannot give it to you because the IRS has not updated their database acknowledging that you've made the payment. So we contact the IRS. IRS saying, because of COVID, we're not updating those databases right now. So they've gotten their money. She's stuck in Singapore and she cannot travel not only to the US, she cannot travel anywhere because she has no passport. So we're already there, And the other thing, as far as what countries are doing, which makes having a second passport so important, is certain countries nationals of certain countries do not need a visa to come to the United States. Most of European nations, Australia, Japan, etc. Well, next year, Europe is putting in a system in place similar to ours, where Americans don't need a visa to go there. However, if you're a person from Europe who has any type of an arrest or a criminal background, could be a DWI, you cannot enter the United States visa free. You have to go get a visa to come here. So it's up to the visa officer whether to give you a visa or not. As of next year, American citizens are subject to the same rules with regards to Europe. So if you want to go to Europe and you're an American citizen and you've got a arrest from college or a DWI, you just can't go to Europe. You have to go to the embassy of the country or the consulate and apply for a visa. And then you're up to the whim of the visa officer of the European country whether to give the visa or not. So I have got American clients who have, who've had, prior run-ins with the law, nothing serious, who are now getting European passports so that they can go to their home in Switzerland, for example. So, the power that countries have over citizens by controlling their passports, their ability to travel, can never be overestimated.
No. We have two questions that came in. One of them relates to Switzerland, which we're going to get to very, very shortly. It's not only is Reaz, again, a citizen also of Switzerland, it is going to be one of the countries potentially that people of wealth, for a variety of reasons, will look at. There is another question I'm going to let you answer, and this is one of the challenges of being a U.S. citizen, where the IRS has reach all around the world. There's very, very few things you could do offshore that are necessarily going to be a tax advantage. But the specific question is, what are the tax implications of dual citizenship? I'm assuming he mainly means a U.S. citizen and getting another citizenship.
Sure. As a U.S. citizen, first of all, we are allowed to have dual citizenship or multiple, as I do, and most of my clients do. Unlike the U.S., almost no country in the world taxes its citizens if they're living abroad. So as a Swiss citizen, I do not pay taxes in Switzerland. So there's no implication to me to being a Swiss. But if I have any bank accounts out of the U.S., or if there are any trusts on which I'm either a protector or a beneficiary or the trustee, or if there's a closely held company of which I'm a member, all of those have to be reported to our authorities under something called FATCA. FATCA went into effect after the UBS scandal in the 2007 and 8. So the implication to the US is that your tax bracket is exactly the same, but be mindful that whatever you're doing out of the country is being reported over here. And if you choose not to live in the United States and you live, let's say, in Switzerland, then you become a tax resident in Switzerland. Fortunately, the US has tax treaties with many developed countries and most of the Western democracies, whereby we avoid double taxation. So the way it works is in Switzerland, if I pay taxes in Switzerland at the federal and cantonal level, this tax preparer would say, okay, what is my tax obligation in the US? And to the extent there is a difference in the US favor, then I have to write a check to the US government. If my tax bill in Switzerland is more than what I would have paid over here, I do not pay taxes in Switzerland, in America, sorry.
Yes. And even though it may not be a tax arbitrage, there are some advantages. And I don't know if we're going to have the time to get into it. It's probably more estate planning or pure asset protection. But for an American citizen to have certain trust set up offshore, not to hide from the IRS. That's impossible, and shouldn't be the case. You should pay what you owe. It is what it is. But to make it very, very hard for others to go there, litigate, and win. So it's a very good wealth preservation strategy, but it needs to be done correctly. You may want to keep your actual monies in other areas than, say, Nevis or the Cook Islands, which are going to be two common areas for those that are very concerned relative from litigation. And this is a very complex subject. They all intertwine for these kind of families: immigration, taxes, estate planning, wealth preservation, investing even. This is why it's a deep, deep subject. Let's get to, and that question and your answer to it kind of sets the tone. So a fair number of people may look at Europe, one of the EU countries, as an opportunity for them to go to. They know that there may be a so-called buy-in to get dual citizenship, usually defined as buying real estate or investing through sometimes a private equity fund. I think that's more specifically Cyprus. But why don't you talk a little bit about some of the more common European and EU type destinations that people would often look for an initial dual citizenship in?
So when I am contacted by a family about acquiring European or other nationality, the first thing I do is I like to see their family tree. Many Americans, their families migrate to the U.S. in the 20th century, and therefore, depending on what country they came from and what's whether it was a grandfather or great grandfather, they may qualify for citizenship by ancestry. That's something many people don't think about initially. So as I told you earlier about all the Americans that have contacted me over the last 6 months plus, I would say about a quarter, 30% of them have qualified for European citizenship because they're the children or grandchildren of someone that was born in Europe, which is great, okay, because it doesn't require any investment at all. It's just a matter of proving the lineage and filing papers with the embassy and the appropriate authorities. If one doesn't qualify based on ancestry, then the question becomes, do you want residence or citizenship? Now, residence is relatively easy to get in many European countries, but it often comes with a tax implication. Even though there's tax treaties in place, you must become a tax resident of that particular country. There's paperwork and things that need to be managed. Now, so passport citizenship without becoming a resident is very desirable. Presently, there are 2 countries in Europe where a person can get, and when I say Europe, I'm talking about the European Union and the 4 members of the European Free Trade Agreement, which are Norway, Iceland, Switzerland, and Liechtenstein, plus the EU members. And those are Cyprus and Malta. Both are programs that have been in effect since 2013 and 14, very successful, not inexpensive, just as far as what's required. In Cyprus, a person has to contribute 200,000 euros to the government, which has some development funds. That's not money you get back. And you must purchase real estate valued at 2 million euros and hold it for 5 years. There's no requirement that a person spend any time in Cyprus. Reason being is that the European Parliament and Cyprus have taken the position that in donation of that amount and a purchase of that amount of real estate is a pretty substantial tie to a country. Malta has a program which is a little bit different, and which is going to a new version of it as of October 1, which will require that a person contribute 750,000 euros to the Maltese government. That your money's not, you don't get that back, and purchase real property valued at least 700,000 euros and hold it for 5 years, or you can rent a flat for a relatively nominal amount, like 1,500 or 1,800 euros a month, and hold it for 5 years. Plus, with regards to Malta, you must also establish some ties to the country, such as joining a association, a club, donating money to the local church, things like that, and spend about 3 to 4 weeks in the first year, and then you can get citizenship. So in Cyprus, no residence requirement. Process will take about 7 to 9 months to get citizenship. Malta, the things we talked about, and takes about, let's say, 14 to 15 months to get multi-citizenship. Now, both of them are EU members. So, once you have a passport from Malta or Cyprus, then you're free to go live anywhere in Europe, work anywhere in Europe, as well as the 4 countries that I mentioned before: Switzerland, Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein. And Switzerland is the one country in that group where people really like the idea of being able to live and own property and have their banking done out of there, set up their family office over there, and being a European member, national, it's pretty easy. As an American, if one wants to go live in Switzerland, it's much more challenging. You have to get a particular type of visa, usually an employment visa or the like.
That's for sure. So from my families that have done it, exactly what you said, Cyprus and Malta are basically going to be the entree that's going to work for them in the EU. Then they have a lot of flexibility from there. There is one that I hear is up and coming. We'll see. It's not an EU country yet, but it probably is one of the lower buy-ins. What are you hearing about Montenegro?
Good. I mean, I actually was invited to Montenegro back in 2018 when they were considering the program, to give my opinion on what the program should look like. So I can take a little bit of credit for it having this program, but not too much. Montenegro is in advanced negotiations with the European Union to become a full member. Most people believe that it will, and I certainly am in that group, that it will become a full member. Reason being are multiple. One, Montenegro was the last of the Baltic states through which Russia had access to the seas. And for European security, in 2018, Montenegro became a member of NATO, which is very important for European security. And to further, kind of make Montenegro part of the European community, Europe is trying to fast track its full membership of the European Union. And it's interesting. I mean, when you go to Montenegro, business is already being transacted in euros. This was back in 2018 already. So, which tells me that, being a part of Europe, being a neighbor of Croatia, which is a member of the European Union, and being a member of NATO, it's just a matter of time before Montenegro becomes a full member of the European Union.
Yes, and I think we do need to dive a little bit deeper into Switzerland, since that is deemed to be by many of great wealth kind of the holy grail. Neutral country, has been very safe for hundreds of years, an incredible banking system, and a tremendous amount of people around the world, including many of the world's richest people, especially outside of the US, effectively have their money and capital there. That also, wink, wink, provides a level of safety from a variety of different perspectives. So we all know this already. So you mentioned that a US citizen looking to go directly to Switzerland and become a citizen, again, a tremendous amount of money and a little time and patience. That may be like a 10-year process. I'm assuming the easier route is to do the Cyprus, the Malta, perhaps start to place resources in Switzerland, perhaps even residency. And still it may be that 10-year process. There also, depending on the age of children, there also is going to be a military requirement. So if you could talk a little bit about, softly going into Switzerland the way that I described it, and maybe some of the advantages and disadvantages.
Sure. Interesting fact about Switzerland that maybe everyone doesn't know is that, Switzerland is a democracy. It was actually founded in 1192. So it's been around for 728 years as a confederation, and a democracy. So, it's a wonderful place to be just for that particular reason. I mean, they have a direct democracy there. As far as the soft landing as opposed to the more difficult pathway, if you're a European Union citizen, to go to Switzerland, you just go there, figure out which canton you want to live in, you register with the local authorities, and that's it. There's no application process. You have to just show that you have the ability to support yourself and you've got health insurance coverage. Not an issue for any of our clients. After being in Europe, living in Switzerland for at least 10 years, depending on how much time you spend there, you may qualify for Swiss citizenship. And that would be for the principals as well as minor children. I won't talk about the military obligation right now because it's not as onerous as one thinks. The more difficult path would be for the non-EU, European free trade agreement countries. Americans, how do Americans go there? You would have to get either a work visa or set up a company and get an investor/employment visa. Or what Switzerland has is, which is interesting, they have a visa for retirees. So if you're a very wealthy person, and certainly all the people that we work with are, you can apply for this retiree visa, purchase a significant real estate asset, show that you have the ability and the means to support yourself and have health insurance. And you can get this retiree visa, which is a long-term visa. And after having had it for a number of years, you can actually convert that into what's called a permanent resident status, which is like our green card. So that is a pathway into Switzerland. It's not ideal because that only gives you the right to live and work in Switzerland. And if people want to have access to broader Europe, and I would say even around the world as far as travel is concerned, having a passport is much more valuable than having the right to stay in one particular country.
That's for sure. Let's move on a little bit. We'll indirectly come back to Switzerland and perhaps banking in a little while. But in going around the world, and probably a little more so for the LATAM and the North America community, is going to be the Caribbean. Now, you're going to get probably much less cost potentially to buy in. You're going to be closer to mainland US if that's an issue for you. But you're also, some of these countries they're not Switzerland. They're not as stable from a military perspective, a governmental perspective. So there's going to be potentially some risk. And I love the Caribbean. I've been to most countries there. But if you had to single out, of course, we can't go through every country, but if you had to single out 2 or 3 that may be a good option, what do you think they would be?
Yeah, I mean, there are 5 countries in the Caribbean right now where one can get citizenship, I would say within 6 months, with an investment of between $200,000 and $500,000 US. That's St. Lucia, Antigua, Dominica, St. Kitts, and Grenada. The one I think that offers the most benefit is probably Grenada. And the reason I think it does is for a few different interesting tidbits about Grenada. One, like the others, it is a very good ally of the United States. And its passport allows a person to travel visa-free to interesting countries that you wouldn't think, such as Russia and China. Whereas, everyone needs a visa to go to China and Russia. If you are Grenadian, you don't. Now, for personal or business reasons, people that travel to China regularly, it's good to have a Grenadian passport. The other advantage that Grenada has, there's an economy there that's independent of their citizenship by investment program. The leading business in the island is a medical school called St. George Medical School, which I've visited many times. And I advised the government there as well when they were setting up their program. I know it very well, and I like the country very much. The St. George is such an important medical school that about 1% of all doctors in practice in America today are graduates of that particular medical school.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's mind-boggling. I mean, they graduate, 1,500 or 2,000 students a year. It's been on for a number of years. So it's got a very close relationship with the U.S. as far as with education and our healthcare system. The one other benefit of Grenada, which isn't directly on, helps Americans right now, but it tells you about our relationship with them is, in 1986, President Reagan and the then president of Grenada entered into a bilateral investment treaty whereby a citizen of Grenada, if that person invests money in a U.S. business and owns at least 50% of it, can get a special visa called an investor visa, and vice versa for Americans. Now, why is that important? Let's say if a person, is taking a second passport and is thinking maybe of one day expatriating. And we haven't talked about that yet, but they still have business interests in the United States. Having a passport from a country that has a bilateral investment treaty and allows for a treaty visa, investor visa, is very important. So that's why I prefer Grenada over the other 4 jurisdictions in the Caribbean.
That's an excellent brief overview. We've had one of my families make the move to Grenada for some of the reasons that you noted. I believe one of the countries you mentioned was at Antigua.
Mm-hmm.
Antigua is interesting. It's a beautiful island. And we're going to get maybe a little bit to banking shortly. And we see some gigantic multi-billion-dollar families for a variety of reasons look to effectively create their own, and sometimes somewhat commercial, but really be in charge private bank. Antigua has some interesting and more liberal guidelines than other countries, which are very sometimes cumbersome. Now, you could argue maybe it's too open. That's not necessarily so good and may be an issue for a variety of purposes. But I do find Antigua to be interesting. We have one family from the banking perspective that I noted, and possibly dual citizenship, looking into that. I guess some of the challenge in some of the other countries in the Caribbean, I remember that, Dominica used to be in play and that was an ultra low buy-in, but no offense, I guess they're never going to invite me to their country. But the passport just is not as respected around the world. It's just a reality of it. And that is potentially a challenge with some of these countries in the Caribbean, depending on how the political situation shifts and the governments of those countries, their passports may not be respected. And if you're leaving here, this country, which is, I'd like to hope ultra safe, although I punched a couple of holes in it, thinking that it's going to be safer in the Caribbean, that's a little hard for me to imagine, but I know it's beautiful and it may offer other benefits.
I look at, a passport and value it based on its utility. Like, what can I do with this particular passport? And the reason the Caribbean countries are very popular is really because it allows good travel utility for people who come from countries that don't have that already. So, for example, if you're a Chinese national, or from Brazil, or India, or Russia, or many of the Middle Eastern countries, and some of the African countries, it doesn't matter how wealthy you are, you really can't travel that much around the country, around the world. So getting a Canadian passport, which gives you visa-free travel to, 90% of the world's nations, becomes very attractive. Americans don't need that because our passport is a great passport as far as global travel is concerned. So for Americans, in my opinion, getting a second passport, which is a Caribbean passport, doesn't offer much other than just the ability to travel if they don't want to travel with their American passport. But they're looking for something more than that, such as strong banking relationships, a place to live, a place to set up, shop and raise your family. I think you have to look to Europe. I think the other place you can look to is Singapore, New Zealand, Australia, perhaps the Cayman Islands, and Uruguay is a country I think that is interesting.
Yes, very good point.
Those are pretty much the options in my opinion.
Yeah, for LATAM, if you don't want to go to another country, the US or Switzerland, and we're going to get to why people would want to come here. Trust me, it's coming. But for LATAM, I would say I actually have a relative that's from Uruguay. And he talks glowingly so much about it. And yes, that would be certainly a country that would kind of check the box on a level of stability, democratic government, et cetera. Let's talk a little bit about Singapore. I believe that is a country where if they're going to accept you, you do have to renounce your citizenship in another country. You got to be completely dedicated to them. What you think would be some of the advantages and disadvantages?
Well, the advantages of being Singaporean, first of all, it's easy for a wealthy family to set up shop in Singapore. Our office in Singapore has set up hundreds of family offices. The laws, especially tax laws in place, are very favorable to people that want to set up family offices and run their funds out of Singapore. It doesn't help Americans much because as a US citizen, you're a taxpayer on your worldwide income. It doesn't matter. So, but if a person does want to become Singaporean, it is a stable country, very low taxes. Business is done in English. English is the primary language. The downside is that you have to give up your American citizenship. Now, that, for those of our in the audience that don't know, if you give up your US citizenship, there's something called an exit tax that you have to pay, which is, to simplify it, is you take your worldwide assets, do a mark-to-market valuation, and you basically pay 23.8% tax on a deemed sale, which can be exorbitant. The case most people are familiar with is Eduardo Saverin, who gave up his US citizenship right before Facebook went public. And Eduardo wrote a check for about $400 million to give up his American citizenship. Okay, he's made that back, 10, 15 times, but at the time he had to write that check. I've been involved in the largest expatriations in American history. It's a very expensive process. So, if a person is, plans for it, certainly you can do it in a way where it's not going to, be at that high of a number. But you are giving up your American citizenship. And not everybody wants to necessarily give up their American citizenship. Whatever the risk a person is managing, most people are pretty proud to have an American passport. It offers a lot of security. We are the world's, most robust and powerful economy and military. Our systems are strong. There's a lot of great things about this country. This is just about managing uncertainty and risk and giving ourselves kind of flexibility around the world during times of, unease, let's say.
That's for sure. And perhaps someone in another part of the world or in Asia, Singapore, for the reasons you noted, and for a small country, besides, of course, being very clean, efficient, and safe, don't underestimate some of their security protocols. And although it's relatively small, but highly effective military as well, they're pretty protective of what they've accomplished in amazingly, what, in 50, 55 years. I mean, that's a story unto itself that we'll save for another podcast. And the beautiful countries, not good for taxes, but the beautiful, and again, taxes are not going to be the leading impetus for every family that even wants to expatriate. I've seen families go to Sweden, and New Zealand and Australia were the ones I was going to ask about. If you could, not that I'm looking to lump them together, but we tend to do that. What do you see as some of the advantages and disadvantages to dual citizenship in one of those two countries?
I don't see any disadvantage to being a dual U.S., Aussie or Kiwi. I think it works out just fine. And if, those are both, especially Australia is a high tax jurisdiction. So if a person uses their Australian citizenship to live in Australia, I think some, planning has to be done to mitigate some of the tax exposure, which can be done. The process to acquire citizenship either those countries can be anywhere from 3 to 5 years. And during those 3 to 5 years, one must spend, especially in the case of Australia, quite a bit of time there. So you have to be very careful not to become a tax resident while you're waiting to become a citizen. Again, tax is only on income and not wealth. And a lot of our clients can move to Australia for 3 to 5 years and not draw on any income. They can just take, go there with money and live off of that. So it's not a terrible thing for our clients. But once you have their citizenship in Australia, then you don't have to stay there any number of days. And Australia does not tax its citizens if they're not living in Australia, neither does New Zealand. So there is really no downside to getting an Australian or New Zealand passport, in my opinion.
And would you say it's expensive? Did you discuss the cost?
It is expensive. I think in New Zealand dollars, I think you have to put to invest about 10 million New Zealand dollars for a period of 5 years. Australia, it's a similar amount, but it's in the millions of Australian dollars, and it's invested. It's not that you're making a donation to the country, and it could be invested in companies or even in public securities, and kept for, I think it's 5 years.
And, we discussed offline, and it's not going to be the focus of your background in today, but it relates somewhat to it. So I'll briefly bring it up, especially this summer, as I've done so much research and interviews with my biggest multi-billion-dollar families in revamping what I do, becoming more effective and efficient, more valuable, more of a global resource, looking to be more global, and really the masterclass, which finally is done. Go to the new website, everyone. You'll be able to see it at FamilyOfficeAssociation.com, is those kind of families forming offshore insurance companies, sometimes just purely as a business, commercial insurance companies, sometimes a lighter step as a captive or reinsurer, and or banks. Cyprus in the EU for perhaps families at truly a significant level, potentially Switzerland, again, deemed by some to be the Holy Grail, and probably some easier touch points for U.S. families in the Caribbean, Bermuda, the Caymans. We mentioned Antigua before. If you could give a little bit of an overview in terms of what you're seeing from a global perspective and some of the same destinations that we already spoke about, families looking to diversify their risk by structures and entities like insurance companies and banks, which may provide, we'll save that podcast for a different time, but some very specific benefits back to them.
Sure. I can't talk too much on this because we have at our firm a lot of depth on advising families and how to set up the businesses that you just talked about in different jurisdictions. But I'll just say that it is a very good strategy for wealthy families to protect their assets. It's really an asset protection play by setting up a insurance company offshore. And the countries you mentioned are the more common ones, of course, or acquiring a bank, a private bank in one of those countries, and capitalizing it with your own assets. I have a mandate right now from an American client that's I'm trying to buy a private bank in Switzerland, which will become their personal private bank, which is the way a lot of private banks started, especially Swiss banks. It's family's wealth first, and then other people will come in. And if you look at some of the family banks in private banks in Switzerland right now, many of them were founded by families. There are public banks. It's the Von Tobel. It's a public bank, public listed bank. It was founded by the Von Tobel family, and the Von Tobel family still owns about 80% of the shares of the bank. And there's other families in Switzerland that own significant shares of their publicly listed banks. So those are good plays, but I don't want to say more than that because I'm sure one of my colleagues will hear me talk and then ridicule me tomorrow or whenever this gets published.
Well, I'm just happy that potentially people, partners of counsel at the legendary Withers even listens to the Angelo Robles podcast, but I'm lucky to have some great friends in Withers, and I'm sure there's a couple. They'll be excited that you're on. One of the things I'll point out with banks, because sometimes I do get that question almost as to why you don't control the risk procedures at a bank. Now, there's standards with the government they need to hold to in the US, but if you're worth, billions of dollars, the level of diversity you need, it's not like the FDIC is going to come and save you. And we've seen, 12 years ago, banks have disastrous risk control policies. It's gotten better. But when you own your own bank, you're 100% in control. Some families also like it for gold. Some still own good old-fashioned stock certificates. You also get insights into what other investors may be looking at to get loans against, to get access to certain currencies and opportunities. Trust me, we'll do a separate podcast. I covered it a little bit in my solo recently, but there are benefits to it. It's a little off topic. I'm just going to briefly mention it. Then we'll get to really expatriation, which we didn't dig too deeply into. But if you're an American family that wants to stay here in the States as a citizen, and I completely get it, but you're frustrated by taxes, and I get that too, there is not a better, but it's by a mile, the best income tax and capital gains play would be Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, 2 U.S. territories with extraordinary tax benefits. And again, that's a subject of a very deep upcoming podcast. But if income taxes were the play, that would potentially be something to consider. We discussed it a little bit, but you covered it in pretty good detail, but I think we do need to bring it up again. And that is the one step further than owning assets and resources offshore, dual citizenship, multiple citizenship, passports, etc., is to say, for whatever reason, that I do want to expatriate. So you mentioned there is a process to go through. Yep. It is going to cost money. And you are giving it up. And I'm assuming if you change your mind 3 years later, they're probably not going to be too happy with you to bring you back. On the other hand, when you're a billionaire and you have money to spend, probably magic and everything could happen. But this is a big decision. What do you do even on the non-financial aspect, do you remind them, listen, your spouse, your kids, your grandkids, do you think about this? Because this is a very big move.
So I like to equate giving up your US citizenship as divorcing. Now, you can divorce your spouse and still date them if you want. And theoretically, you can even marry your spouse again. So, expatriating is not seen as an evil act by the US government, or for that matter, by any country. So long as you're not doing it for tax reasons. Now, of course, there may be a tax benefit to expatriating. I mean, if you expatriate and become Australian, there's no tax benefit to it. But let's say if there's a tax benefit, so long as that's not the main reason you're doing it, there is no negative connotation to doing it. Now, once you expatriate, then you are in the same boat as any other non-US person. So if you want to come visit here, you have to have a passport that either doesn't require a visa, a European passport, or Singapore or Chile or whatever, or qualify for a visa. And visas you can qualify for: visitors visas, visitor for pleasure, visitor for business, investor visas, employment visas. So coming back to the US, you're in the same boat as anybody else. And most of our clients, I would say all my clients that have expatriated, have been able to come back if they want to. And let's say for some reason, you person expatriates because, for whatever reason, and then years later, they want to come back to the US and become American again. Even that's available to you. You have to just go through the path of first getting a green card like anybody else, and then becoming a US citizen. And I have represented families who were American, gave up the US citizenship, reacquired a green card, and then again became US citizens. Most people choose not to do that because the reasons why they expatriated to begin with were because the center of their world was already outside of the US. Their business was outside of the US. The family, their life was already out of the US, and therefore, just being able to come and visit and work here if they want to, invest here, gives them enough access to the country.
And one of the questions coming in on the chat feature, it's a very simply stated, but that's perfect, is effectively, how about the new French talent passport? I've never heard of this.
Sure. So interesting, a lot of European countries have a special visa for people that are very talented. And talent could be either in the arts, in business, a special focus on tech. So if you're someone who's exceptional, then you can apply for a visa and go and live in France. But be careful, because France is a very high tax jurisdiction. And there's not any tax benefit or any estate tax benefit to becoming French. It just allows you to go and live in France and work in your field of whichever you're an expert in. And by the way, Switzerland has that, the UK has that, Austria has that. Most countries have a special visa for people that are very gifted in their particular field.
And let's talk a little bit about the opposite of what most of our discussion has been about. Let's talk about the rest of the world and their interest in coming here for work, for opportunity, for citizenship here. Now, from the outside looking in, we would deem it to be that immigration into this country has become more complicated. But if you could talk a little bit about from the perspective of the world looking to come here, and then I'll have some more specific questions from there.
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing U.S. immigration work since 1991. I was once in Manila, and I was talking with then U.S. Ambassador John Negroponte, who became our first director of intelligence under President Bush. And he was telling me that, being there, the ambassador to Manila was so interesting because if you looked out one window, he saw people that were always out there protesting against American imperialism. America is the big evil country. And look, the other window, there were hundreds of people waiting online to get visas to come to the US. Okay, so there's this love-hate relationship people have with America. For all the reasons we said earlier, Angelo, our education systems, our business environment, our capital markets, our ingenuity in places like Silicon Valley and MIT and so forth, it can go on and on. This is a very desirable country for people from all over the world. we don't have a history of confiscating property. We don't tax wealth, although we have an estate tax. Um, it's a country where law and order is paramount. There's predictability with the court systems, and people do come here. And for every person, like I said earlier, that wants to leave, there's many more that want to come here. Unfortunately, over the last few years, it's the opportunities for individuals to come here is getting smaller as far as the availability of visas and how we're enforcing it. For example, right now, due to COVID, the president has, and I think rightfully, stopped allowing certain visa holders to come in who are coming here to work because, that's a job that an American can do. But we're also then not letting investors come to the U.S. with investor visas. And in so doing, we are limiting foreign direct investment into the U.S. And that's where things, I think, there's room for improvement. One thing that we don't want to do is close our borders, because there is a kind of a competition with developed countries for talent and investments. There's a book called The Next 100 Years by George Friedman. I think I made mention to you, which I think was written in 2009, where he says, due to aging populations and families having less children, developed countries are going to need labor, and they're going to need investors coming in with employees, and they're going to compete for it. So, if we don't let foreign workers come in, if we don't let foreign investors come in and bring foreign workers, they're going to go elsewhere. They're going to go to places, certain countries in Latin America. They're going to go to certain countries in Asia. They're going to go to Canada. They're going to go to Europe. So I think that there's a tremendous desire by people from all over the world to come to the U.S. And we should encourage them as much as possible. I mean, I think I mentioned to you, I do a lot of work in Latin America. Due to what's been happening in Chile the last year and a half, due to the continuous uncertainty in places like Argentina, and obviously Venezuela, and you can put Mexico in there as well due to their leftist government. There are a lot of wealthy Latin American families and businesses that want to move up to the U.S. And our immigration policies need to recognize that there's that group of immigration, that type of immigration that we want to see and encourage, while also maintaining border security and keeping people, who are coming in unlawfully without having proper checks, preventing them from coming in.
And it's a little bit off topic from immigration, but kind of ties into it. If you feel it's more of a question for tax or estate counsel, feel free to pass on it. But you do hear of wealthy foreigners and companies setting up very discreet and private, quote unquote, LLCs and companies in states that are going to be very well known for, quote unquote, privacy: Delaware, Wyoming, South Dakota. And I'm assuming this is bringing capital into this country. We are the world's currency, the most stable government, most powerful military. Again, we could count 100 reasons why potentially that's a good decision. Anything you wanted to comment to about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to continue for one very simple reason, and that is most countries in the world abide by what's called CRS, which is Common Reporting Standards. So if you're a national of Brazil and you have your money in Panama, Panama will report to the Brazilian authorities what do you have in Panamanian banks, or what Panamanian companies you're a owner or nominee or beneficial owner of. We don't have that. So while we require the entire world to report anything and everything on U.S. residents for tax purposes, which are U.S. citizens and green card holders, by the way, as well as other people that are in the U.S., for more than half the year. So you have to report to us. We don't report to anybody. So we will never report to other countries what foreigners have over here, which, by the way, is very controversial. It's very controversial, but, being, we are so powerful in so many ways, we can't have that rule in place. I will tell you, I'm not sure if that's my opinion is, I don't think that's going to be the rule for a very long time. I think that there will be international pressure at some point on the U.S. to play by the same rules that we want everybody else to play by. But until that happens, you're right. I mean, places like, Wyoming or Delaware and North Dakota, people setting up trusts over there, which are not recorded anywhere, and having those trusts own hundreds of millions, in some cases, billions of dollars worth of assets in the US is something that brings a lot of capital to our country.
Well, we spent a good amount of time together, and I still have questions, but again, we want to leave a little bit in the tank for the next time. Reaz, for those that would like to learn more about you and understand your practice and perhaps want to reach out, what are ways they could do that?
I'm, as busy as I am, I'm probably the easiest person to get a hold of. You can go to our website, withersworldwide.com or withersglobal.com, and it's right there. On my profile, my cell phone number is there. I know it's crazy to have everyone have my cell phone, but we live in a world where I think we all need to be able to be reached whenever and however people want. So reach out to me through either my cell phone on my websites or through an email, and I'll probably get back to you within a couple of hours. That's how I like to do. At least I like to work.
Well, that's excellent. And by the way, Reaz, everyone, is spelled R-E-A-Z, and last name is spelled J-A-F-R-I. Everyone, I'm Angelo Robles. I'm the host of the Angelo Robles podcast and founder and CEO of Family Office Association, a global membership organization dedicated to families of great success and their family offices. We do a significant amount of original proprietary content, arguably on the single family office community, maybe more than anyone else in the world. We take great pride in that. If this was pre-COVID, I would have said we host events around the world and have had amazing speakers, but that's a bit on hold because we want to be very, very safe. But we've adapted and become very digital. And as one of my members stated, went from doing 10 events a year to doing 200 because we're doing these practically every day, especially for the members, Monday through Friday, with great guests like Reaz today, and doing much deeper dives than you often get with the fast go, go, go world at a physical event. This has been a very creative period for me and Family Office Association. I noted our new website, which is the same URL, but everything is new about it, FamilyOfficeAssociation.com. My email is angelo@FamilyOfficeAssociation.com. And you'll see a lot of resources more than ever before, including our masterclass, where many of the areas on mitigating risk and some of the things we spoke about today are covered in over 6 hours of instruction and video exclusively for our members, but there is an aspect of it that could be purchased by non-members. So there's much to learn from that. We hope you have a chance to go to the site. I'm also very active on social media. The YouTube channel is Family Office, as is Twitter, Family Office Association on Instagram. I'm easy to find. We hope you have a chance to reach out. Reaz, thank you for being a great guest. Thank you.
Thank you, Angelo.